Hey, what's up guys? My name is Daniel. This is my channel called In Stitches. So today we're covering double shaker stitch. This stitch is, aesthetically it looks a lot like a traditional rib. It's more like the bizarre and demented cousin of that stitch. Traditional rib you'd see at the cuff of a sweater, the base of a sweater, edge of a hat. The reason for that is it's stretchy, but it also hugs whatever surface it's around. This shaker stitch, very horizontally stretchy, but it doesn't bounce back. So it's, are you eating a Pop-Tart?
Yeah, it's cherry, anti-toxicants.
I mean, what are you doing here, man?
Support. It is teamwork.
Support. You barely make sense.
Anti-toxicants. You embarrass me, dude.
Embarrassment doesn't begin to explain how I feel about it. You know what? Why don't we go and I'll explain this stitch to you a little bit better. All right, so a lot of shenanigans going on there. So there are three aspects of this stitch that I really want to drive home. Firstly, the size needle that you use matters. Every skein of wool has a label on it. On that label, it'll suggest the needle size that you use. In my case, it says between a 5 and a 6 US. Now, you always want to go with the smaller needle size with this stitch because it's dense, and if you use the bigger needle, it'll make your piece really sag. Second item you want to watch out for is the weight of the actual yarn itself. If you use something like a cotton, you're gonna be sad. You're gonna be a sad person. We want to avoid that. So use something light, fluffy. Light and fluffy works, but really just the weight of the actual yarn is important. Thirdly, because it's a dense fabric, you tend to use a lot more wool than you would with some other, like a stockinette stitch. So in this case, you want to account for about 50% more wool. Really 30 to 50, but err on the side of caution. Say you're used to doing a scarf, and you know it takes about 2 skeins of wool. You want to do a third skein, 50% more than you would normally use. In the event that you're doing a sweater that takes about 10 skeins, you're going to need about 15 for this one. And it's worth it. It's a beautiful stitch, but again, you want to take that into account. So now, let's get this knitting circle started. Okay, so what you're going to do is cast on an odd number of stitches. The only other thing you really need to know here before getting started, there's one foundation row. Other than this row, there'll only be 2 other rows that we go back and forth doing. This is the only time you'll do the foundation row. So what you'll also notice is, other than the odd number of stitches, we have selvage stitches, which is the first and the last stitch. We're going to knit the selvage stitch every row we do here for the whole project. The first and last stitches will be knit. And on this row, since it's a setup row, row 1, we're going to also knit the second to last stitch. So for this row, all you need to worry about other than the repeat, you knit the first stitch, we're going to knit the last 2 stitches. As you can see by the pattern on the screen. So we're going to knit the first stitch, and then we're going to start the pattern repeat. In this case, we start with a knit stitch. Get this guy out of the way. Get out of the way, guy. Okay, so now, kind of the fancy-ish part, we're going to do a yarn over and a slip one purlwise. Now we're going to do it kind of deliberately. We'll do one at a time here. Yarn over, simply take this yarn, and as the name suggests, it just goes over the needle. Right? Yarn over top. And then we're going to slip one purlwise. Now if I'm to purl, I take this right hand needle, I bring it up front on that stitch, and generally you would wrap it around and pull it through. In this case, since we're just slipping one purlwise, I take the right hand needle, put it into the front of that stitch, I slip it off of the left hand needle, and now it's over here, right? Slip one purlwise. All right, and then that's the repeat. Really simple stitch all around. Knit one, and then again, yarn over, slip one purlwise. Now there's a fancier, knit one, there's a fancier way to do the yarn over, slip one purlwise, and that's to kind of combine the motion. So yarn over, slip one purlwise at one time, as opposed to doing one and then doing the other. Knit one, and it goes. So while you're doing the yarn over, just go right into the slip, right? Doom. And now you can continue alternating knit one, slip one purlwise until the last two stitches, at which point we're just going to knit them. Now with these selvage stitches, which are the first and the last stitches, you want to pull them pretty tight with this stitch. Okay, you always want the first and the last one to be tight. And that's not always true with other stitches, but it's the case here. Row one, complete. Row two is not going to seem really much different at all in comparison to the first row. As in all rows, we're going to knit the first and the last, and remember I said I want it to be a little tight. Now we're going to start off with a slip one purlwise yarn over, or really a yarn over slip one purlwise. And then we go into a knit two together. See that? It's kind of a yarn, that's the yarn over slip one purlwise we did from the last row. Anytime you see that, you know you're knitting together. We're going to take the two stitches and make them one. Take my right hand needle, put them into both, wrap it around back, and pull it through. Now that's a single stitch there. That's how we know it's time to do our yarn over slip one purlwise. So you can just remember what you did and go back and forth between the knit two together, slip one purlwise. I like to have a visual idea of what I'm doing too. The single one is where I'm doing the slip one purlwise with the yarn over. These guys that are on each other's backs here, no respect for space, they get knit two together. So, I don't know. If you like to see how things are going visually, in case you lose your mark and not exactly sure what you want to do, I feel like that's the way to go. Otherwise, we're just going to repeat the rest of the way here. And remember that we end on a knit one. And we're going to pull it tight. Pull it tight. Okay, this is row 3. And really, after we're done with this, we're just going to repeat row 2 and 3 for the rest of the time. Really basic stitch all around here. So as we said before, first and last stitches are knits, and we're going to pull them nice and tight. Now, the way this goes, and it's going to be on the screen, we start off with a knit two together. This is a yarn over slip one purlwise from the last row. Like we said before, they're kind of piggybacking on each other. Those are the two that we're knitting together. Get that out of the way. tail likes to creep in there sometimes. So get out of here, tail. So then you've got the standalone guy too, right? That's the one we're going to slip with a yarn over. That's the one we're going to knit two together. Like I said, it's nice having a visual idea of what's going on. That way you don't lose your mark. So you'll notice this is almost the same exact, it's the same repeat as row 2. It's just staggered. So instead of starting with a slip one purlwise, we start with a knit two together. And then they alternate back and forth between row 2 and 3. In row 1, we only do the one time in the beginning. It's even a little redundant for me to be doing it at this point, but it might be useful to some people, so voila, doing it. I went ahead and knit quite a few rows, and I've got a nice little sample going here. So now we're at our bind off row. Now to bind off, we're going to identify certain stitches as knits and purls, right? So in this case, we have all the ridges, right? You see all the ridges. So the part that pops up, we're going to consider those knit stitches. But like you can see in the rest of your work, we have the knit and the slip stitch kind of on top of each other. There's the two that just won't give each other space. And then we have the one in between. The one in between is our purl stitch. These two that are coupled up are the knit stitch. Now when we do the bind off, we're going to knit those two together, and then we're going to bind them over top. Then we're going to just purl one, bind it over top. So basically where the knits are, we're going to knit two together before we bind it over top. And that'll become evident when I show you here what we're doing. So as in all of our edge stitches, we're going to knit the first one. Boom. And now, because this one doesn't have a stitch over top and it's in the gully, that's a purl. So purl, and I imagine you've bound off stitches before. If you haven't, now we have two stitches over here. We have to turn them into one, right? So I'll take this left-hand needle. I'm going to place it in front of the first stitch, the furthest stitch down the needle. And then I'm going to pull it over top of the second stitch here. And I do that by kind of guarding on this needle, the tip, so the stitch doesn't slip off. And I'm going to pass it down under the first stitch and slide it over top. Now that first stitch is around the base of that stitch, and it's nice and secure there. So now these two stitches are kind of on top of each other. That's where we're going to knit two together. Knit two stitches together. And now I'm in the same position I was in before. I've got two stitches over on the right hand needle, which we're going to turn into one stitch by binding it off. I'll do that a little slower next time so you can see. And now I'm slowly getting rid of stitches over here. So the next one, since we just knit two together, the last one, we're going to purl again. We're going to purl that stitch over here, and now that I have two stitches there again, I'm going to bind one off. Now again, we have these two stitches that are kind of on top of each other. Really more like that. So what am I going to do? I'm going to knit the two of them together until I have two stitches over here again. I'm going to bind that off. And now that's the rhythm of this thing. We just knit 2 together, so now I'm going to purl the 1. And bind it off. And that's how we're going to get all our stitches off. So I will meet you on the other side here, but we're going to continue that. Knit 2 together, bind off, purl 1, bind off, knit 2 together, bind off. Make sure you don't go too tight. Really, like in all knitting, it's don't go too tight, don't go too loose for the most part, which I think you just get in time. And now that last stitch, you're just going to pull all the way through. And look what you got. Nice little square. Hopefully for you, it's a project like a scarf or something else, but if you just made a square, it's a finished piece either way. I don't even know why I do this. This last part, nobody watches this. I think people watch the first parts because they tend to be a little bit funny, and then nobody's actually watching these for knitting instruction. So should you have gotten to this part of the video, you kind of get the gist. You've watched YouTube before. I'm gonna ask you to subscribe. I mean, it really doesn't matter if you do or don't. It's nice, it makes me feel good. So, I don't know. Do you care about that? It's not a big deal, but if you would subscribe, I'd appreciate it. You know, share it with your friends. I put a little effort into these, so I like, I don't know, I'd like more people to watch them. So subscribe, share, do whatever you will. I'll be coming out with more videos soon, I'm sure, and I get a kick out of them. So, yep, you guys have a good day. Thank you. Congratulations, guys.